The most powerful man in the world is dying in a borrowed bed. Augustus, once called Octavian, before that simply Gaius Octavius, lies in the same small room where his father died 76 years earlier. Outside, the summer heat presses down on the Bay of Naples. Inside, the air is thick with incense meant to mask the smell of sickness. He is 75 years old, which by Roman standards makes him ancient. Most men don't live past 50. Most emperors don't die in bed. His wife Livia sits beside him. They have been married for 51 years, longer than most Romans live entire lifetimes. She is 70 herself, still sharp-eyed, still calculating. She has outlasted all his other confidants, all his chosen heirs, all his rivals. Some whisper she helped arrange that longevity through poison and political maneuvering. Whether true or not, she has been the constant presence behind the throne that officially doesn't exist. Augustus knows he is dying. He has known for days, maybe weeks. The chronic illnesses that have plagued him since youth, the weak lungs, the sensitive stomach, the fevers that come and go, have finally converged into something his body cannot fight. But he remains lucid. He calls for a mirror, has slaves adjust his hair. Vanity even now, or perhaps just the habits of a lifetime spent performing for an audience. Then he does something strange. He turns to the small group of friends and family members crowded into the room and asks them a question. Have I played my part well? The phrase comes from Roman comedy. It's what actors say when they exit the stage, asking the audience to judge their performance. The witnesses understand immediately what he means. Augustus, the man who spent 40 years pretending not to be a king, who carefully called himself princeps, first citizen rather than emperor, who restored the Republic while quietly dismantling every mechanism that made it function, Augustus knows exactly what he has been doing all along, playing a part. The greatest political performance in human history. He waits for their response. These people, senators, relatives, old soldiers, owe everything to him. Their wealth, their status, their very lives exist because Augustus won the civil wars and chose to let them live. They applaud. What else can they do? He seems satisfied. Then he adds one more line, switching to Greek. The language of culture and philosophy. Since, well, I've played my part, all clap your hands. And from the stage dismiss me with applause. He kisses Livia. Then he dies. In that moment, the Roman world holds its breath, because no one knows what comes next. News of Augustus's death reaches the capital before nightfall. Imperial couriers, riding in relay along the Via Appia, cover the 130 miles from Nola to Rome in less than a day. The Senate is summoned to emergency session. The Praetorian. Guard, the emperor's personal military force, the only soldiers allowed in Italy, takes up positions throughout the city. Grain warehouses are secured. The urban cohorts, Rome's police force, go on high alert. Not because anyone expects an invasion. The empire is at peace, the frontiers are quiet. No foreign enemy threatens Rome. The anxiety is entirely internal. Rome has never experienced a peaceful transition of absolute power. Every previous change, Caesar's assassination, the civil wars between Antony and Octavian, even Augustus's own consolidation of control, involved violence, armies marching, blood in the streets. Now for the first time, an emperor has died of natural causes in his bed, and the entire system must prove it can survive the transition. Augustus planned for this. He spent decades planning for it, actually. That's what consumed his final years, what kept him awake at night, more than any barbarian threat or economic crisis, the succession. Because Augustus understood the fundamental problem with the system he had created, it depended entirely on having an Augustus. When Octavian defeated Mark Antony at Actium in 31 BCE and became master of the Roman world, he faced a delicate problem. Rome hated kings. The Republic had been founded on the expulsion of the last king, Tarquin the Proud, 500 years earlier. Every Roman child learned the story. Romans swore oaths that they would never tolerate a monarch. The word rex, king, was the worst insult you could hurl at a politician. But Rome also couldn't function as a republic anymore. The civil wars had proven that. The old system, annually elected magistrates, a senate that debated policy, popular assemblies that passed laws, all of it had collapsed under the weight of empire. Too much wealth flowing in from conquered territories. Too many ambitious generals commanding armies loyal to them personally, rather than to the state. Too many slaves replacing free farmers, creating a landless urban mob dependent on handouts. The Republic's institutions had been designed for a city-state, not an empire spanning 3 continents. So Octavian, now calling himself Augustus, a title that meant something like the revered one, invented a solution. He would have all the power of a king without any of the titles or trappings of monarchy. He would rule Rome while pretending not to rule it. Here's how it worked. Augustus held no single office that granted him supreme power. Instead, he accumulated a collection of powers, each one technically legal, each one granted by the Senate, that together made him effectively king without calling him king. He held tribunicia potestas, tribunician power for life. This was the authority traditionally held by the tribunes of the plebs, the officials who represented the common people. It made his person sacrosanct. Anyone who harmed him could be killed on the spot. It gave him the power to veto any law or decree, and it gave him the right to call the Senate into session. He held imperium maius, supreme military command, over all provinces that had legions stationed in them. This meant he controlled the army, all 28 legions scattered across the empire's frontiers. Generals served at his pleasure. Soldiers swore loyalty to him personally. He controlled Egypt as his personal domain. Egypt was the wealthiest province in the empire, the breadbasket that fed Rome's 1 million inhabitants. No senator was even allowed to visit Egypt without his permission. He commanded the Praetorian Guard, 9 cohorts of elite soldiers who guarded his person and maintained order in Italy. They were the only significant military force within hundreds of miles of Rome. He held the position of Pontifex Maximus, chief priest of Rome's state religion. This gave him authority over all religious matters, the calendar, and the interpretation of omens. In a society where religion and politics were inseparable, this was enormous power. He had the auctoritas, the personal prestige and moral authority that came from being Caesar's heir, from having saved Rome from civil war, from his decades of service. When Augustus gave his opinion on something, even if he had no legal authority to enforce it, people listened. None of these powers individually made him emperor, but together they made him untouchable, unchallengeable, and effectively king of the Roman world. The genius, and this really was genius, lay in the presentation. Augustus attended Senate meetings and sat on a simple bench among the other senators. He wore a toga, not a crown. He lived in a modest house on the Palatine Hill, not a palace. When foreign monarchs visited and prostrated themselves before him, he looked uncomfortable, as if all this deference embarrassed him. It was theater. Brilliant, necessary theater. Romans could accept a princeps, a first citizen who was merely the most distinguished among equals. They could accept a man who held power because he deserved it, because he had earned it, because Rome needed him. What they couldn't accept, or so Augustus believed, was a king, and for 40 years the theater worked. The Senate continued to meet, passing laws and debating policy. Consuls were elected every year, holding the highest office in the Republic, just as they had for 5 centuries. The people voted in assemblies, though increasingly those votes simply ratified decisions already made. All the old institutions continued functioning, but everyone understood the reality. One man ruled Rome. One man decided when Rome went to war and when it made peace. One man determined who held office and who faced prosecution. One man's death could throw everything into chaos. That man was now dead. Augustus's obsession with succession had poisoned his final decades. He had no sons of his own, only a daughter, Julia, from his first marriage. In Roman law and custom, power couldn't pass through a woman. So Augustus spent 40 years trying to create a male heir. His first choice was his nephew Marcellus, son of his sister Octavia. Augustus married Marcellus to Julia when the boy was 14 and Julia was 16. Marcellus was handsome, charming, and utterly inexperienced. It didn't matter. He would grow into the role, learn from Augustus, eventually take over. But Marcellus died at 19, possibly from disease, possibly from poison. Rome was full of rumors that Livia had arranged it to clear the path for her own sons. Augustus's second choice was Marcus Agrippa, his oldest friend and most capable general. Agrippa was 25 years older than Julia and already married, but Augustus didn't care. He forced Agrippa to divorce his wife and marry Julia. Agrippa was the one who had actually won most of Augustus's battles: Actium, the naval war against Sextus Pompey, the campaigns in Gaul. He was competent, loyal, and willing to play the role of dutiful subordinate. But Agrippa died at 51, leaving Augustus once again without an heir. By this point, Julia had given Agrippa 5 children. 2 boys survived, Gaius and Lucius Caesar. Augustus adopted them as his own sons, began training them for power, made them consuls designate while they were still teenagers. The succession seemed secure. Then Lucius died at 19 in Spain. 2 years later, Gaius died at 24 from wounds received in Armenia. Some said natural causes, others whispered poison. Livia's name came up again. Augustus, now in his 60s, was running out of options and time. He turned reluctantly to Tiberius Claudius Nero, Livia's son from her first marriage. Tiberius was everything Augustus was not: grim, stern, lacking any trace of charm or political skill. But he was capable. He had been a successful general on the northern frontiers. He understood administration, and most importantly, he was available. In 4 CE, Augustus formally adopted Tiberius as his son, making him legally an heir. But Augustus never liked him, never trusted him completely, never stopped looking for alternatives. He forced Tiberius to adopt Germanicus, the son of Augustus's beloved niece, ensuring another generation of succession. The message was clear. Tiberius was a stopgap, not the future. Tiberius understood this. He spent the next decade as heir-in-waiting, competent and bitter, knowing he was second choice, third choice, maybe fourth choice, serving an emperor who made no secret of his disappointment. Now Augustus was dead, and Tiberius was emperor. The system would be tested. Tiberius receives word of Augustus's death while commanding troops in Illyricum, on the empire's northern frontier. He's 55 years old, a career soldier who has spent more of his life in military camps than in Rome. He returns to the capital quickly but without panic. Whatever his personal feelings about Augustus, he's a professional. The Senate meets in emergency session. Technically, they must now decide what happens next. All of Augustus's powers were legally granted by the Senate and expired with his death. The Senate could, in theory, refuse to grant those same powers to Tiberius. They could restore genuine republican government. They could even choose someone else to be princeps. They do none of these things, because everyone knows what happened the last time Rome didn't have a single strong ruler. Civil war, armies marching on Rome, proscription lists, heads displayed in the forum. No one wants to return to that. The senators are old enough to remember the wars, or their fathers told them stories. They want stability, safety, and the ability to enjoy their wealth in peace. So they beg Tiberius to accept power. That's literally how it works. They formally request that he assume Augustus's titles and authorities. Tiberius, following the script Augustus had written, pretends to hesitate. He speaks of the burden of rule, the difficulty of following such a great man, his own unworthiness. The Senate insists. Back and forth this goes for days, everyone performing their assigned role in this political theater. Finally, Tiberius reluctantly accepts. The Senate grants him tribunician power, grants him supreme military command, grants him every authority Augustus had held. Tiberius is now emperor, though he refuses to use that title. Like Augustus, he calls himself princeps. Like Augustus, he claims to be merely the servant of the Senate and people of Rome. The legions along the frontiers swear loyalty to Tiberius. Provincial governors send letters acknowledging his authority. The grain ships from Egypt continue sailing. Tax collectors keep collecting. The machinery of empire continues functioning without interruption. The system has survived its first test. Barely, because underneath the smooth transition, cracks are already showing. Legions on the Rhine and in Pannonia mutiny, demanding better pay and shorter terms of service. They have lost their beloved commander Augustus and question why they should obey this grim, distant Tiberius. The mutinies are suppressed, but not before revealing a dangerous truth. The emperor's power ultimately rests on the army's willingness to obey. If the soldiers refuse, everything collapses. More troubling, The succession itself reveals the system's fundamental flaw. Power passed from Augustus to Tiberius, not through any constitutional mechanism, but through informal adoption and the Senate's acquiescence. What happens when the next emperor dies? Will the transition be peaceful, or will competing claimants raise armies and plunge Rome back into civil war? Augustus is declared a god, joining Julius Caesar in the Roman pantheon. Temples are built to divine Augustus. Priests are appointed to maintain his cult. By making Augustus divine, Rome acknowledges what everyone already knows but cannot officially say. The Republic is dead, and gods, or godlike men, have replaced it. But what kind of men? Tiberius rules for 23 years, and he does it competently. The empire's finances are well managed. The frontiers are secure. Provinces are governed honestly. Tiberius insists that governors serve longer terms, so they have less incentive to squeeze bribes quickly. He maintains Augustus's policies because they work. He doesn't start wars of expansion, understanding that the empire is large enough that further conquest would strain resources without adding much value. By the standards of effective government, Tiberius is a success. But Roman emperors aren't judged solely on administrative competence. They're judged on character, on how they wield absolute power, on what kind of men they become when no one can stop them from doing anything they want. And Tiberius becomes paranoid. The problem starts with a man named Lucius Aelius Sejanus, the Praetorian prefect, commander of the emperor's bodyguard. Sejanus is ambitious, calculating, and patient. He understands that in a system where all power flows from one man, the way to gain power is to control access to that man. He consolidates the Praetorian Guard, previously scattered around Italy, into a single camp just outside Rome. Now 9,000 elite soldiers answer only to him, and through him to Tiberius. Sejanus begins whispering in Tiberius's ear, enemies everywhere, conspiracies, senators who smile to the emperor's face but plot his overthrow. Some of this might even be true. Tiberius is genuinely unpopular, lacking Augustus's gift for public relations. But Sejanus exaggerates the threats, feeds Tiberius's natural suspicion, isolates him from potential allies. In 26 CE, Tiberius does something unprecedented. He leaves Rome. He retires to the island of Capri, off the coast near Naples, and never returns to the capital. For the last 11 years of his reign, the emperor governs the Roman Empire from a villa on an island, communicating with the Senate through letters, seeing almost no one except Sejanus and a few attendants. Later, Roman historians, writing after Tiberius is safely dead, fill in the details with scandalous stories. Tiberius supposedly indulges in perverse sexual practices, builds elaborate pleasure gardens, throws people who displease him off cliffs into the sea. How much of this is true? Impossible to know. Some might be accurate. Much is probably exaggeration or invention by historians who despise the man and feel free to slander him. What is certainly true is that Tiberius's isolation allows Sejanus to consolidate power in Rome. The Praetorian prefect effectively runs the empire, issuing orders in Tiberius's name, eliminating rivals through treason trials. Senators who might oppose him are accused of plotting against the emperor, tried before compliant juries, executed or forced to suicide. Their property is confiscated. Their families are destroyed. Rome lives under a reign of terror administered by an emperor who isn't even in the city. Then, in 31 CE, Tiberius discovers, or someone finally convinces him, that Sejanus himself is plotting to seize power. The emperor acts with sudden decisiveness. He sends a long letter to the Senate, ostensibly to bestow new honors on Sejanus. The Senate gathers, excited to hear about their powerful prefect's promotion. Sejanus sits in the place of honor. Then the letter is read aloud. It meanders, rambles, discusses various administrative matters. Then, buried deep in the text, comes a sentence. Investigations suggest Sejanus has been disloyal. The Senate should look into this. By the end of the letter, Tiberius is explicitly denouncing his prefect as a traitor. The Senate turns on Sejanus instantly. Within hours, he's arrested, tried, executed, his body thrown down the Gemonian stairs where Romans dump the corpses of criminals. His children are murdered. His followers are hunted down. A purge follows that makes the previous terror look modest. Anyone associated with Sejanus, anyone who might have supported him, anyone suspected of disloyalty, is destroyed. Tiberius remains on Capri, communicating by letter, seeing almost no one, trusting no one. He dies there in 37 CE at age 77. Some sources say he died of natural causes. Others claim he was smothered with a pillow by the Praetorian prefect, who replaced Sejanus. Either way, Rome doesn't mourn him. The lesson of Tiberius's reign is clear. The system Augustus created requires the emperor to perform constant political theater, to maintain the fiction that he's not a monarch, to manage relationships with the Senate and the people. Tiberius was capable of governing, but incapable of performing. His competence wasn't enough, and absolute power without accountability transformed a capable general into a paranoid recluse who ruled through terror. Rome would get worse before it got better. When Tiberius dies, the obvious heir is Gaius Caesar, known by his childhood nickname Caligula, Little Boots, from the military boots he wore as a child when his father Germanicus commanded legions on the Rhine. Caligula is Tiberius's grandnephew, the son of the beloved Germanicus, whom Augustus had designated as part of the succession. He's 24 years old, good-looking, charming, and at first Rome rejoices. The Senate grants him all imperial powers immediately. No hesitation, no pretense of republican debate. The people love him. He's the son of Germanicus. He holds games, distributes money, promises a return to the glory days of Augustus. For the first few months, everything seems wonderful. Then something changes. In October 37 CE, Caligula falls seriously ill. He nearly dies. When he recovers, he's different. What happens to him is unclear. High fever damaging his brain, perhaps, or a mental breakdown triggered by the stress of ruling the empire at 24. Or maybe just the realization that he can do anything and no one can stop him. Whatever the cause, Caligula transforms from a promising young emperor into something monstrous. He begins executing people on whim. He seizes property arbitrarily. He sleeps with senators' wives and then boasts about it publicly. He invents new taxes, on food, on lawsuits, on the wages of porters. He squanders the immense treasury Tiberius had carefully built up. The famous stories start circulating. Caligula makes his horse Incitatus a consul, or at least threatens to. He orders soldiers to collect seashells on a beach as spoils from the conquest of Neptune. He demands to be worshipped as a god during his lifetime, not after death like Augustus and Tiberius. He has conversations with statues of Jupiter, sometimes arguing with the god, sometimes demanding submission. Modern historians debate how much of this actually happened. Suetonius and other ancient writers who preserve these stories were writing decades later, using sources that might have been exaggerated or invented. Some scholars argue Caligula was deliberately mocking the pretensions of the Senate and the absurdity of the imperial system. His horse as consul might be satire, not madness, pointing out that the consulship had become meaningless when the emperor held all real power. But whether Caligula was insane or performing an elaborate prank makes little practical difference to his victims. People die either way. Senators are executed on trumped-up charges. Anyone with wealth becomes a target. The terror under Tiberius and Sejanus had at least maintained a facade of legality. Accusations, trials, evidence real or fabricated. Under Caligula, there's not even that. The emperor's will is law. If he wants you dead, you die. In January 41 CE, Caligula is assassinated. Praetorian guards led by tribunes named Cassius Chaerea and Cornelius Sabinus corner him in a palace corridor and stab him repeatedly. They kill his wife, too, and bash his infant daughter's head against a wall. The violence is thorough, methodical. They're not just removing an emperor, they're exterminating his bloodline. The Senate meets in emergency session, giddy with possibility. Maybe now they can restore the Republic. Maybe now they can take back power. For a few hours they debate. Should they elect magistrates again? Share power among themselves? Some senators even seriously discuss returning to genuine republican government, as if the previous century hadn't happened. Then the Praetorian Guard makes a decision that changes everything. While the Senate debates, Praetorian Guards are searching the palace, looking for any surviving members of the imperial family. They find Caligula's uncle Claudius hiding behind a curtain, terrified he'll be killed too. Claudius is 50 years old, a scholar who has spent his life studying history and writing books. Kept away from power because of physical disabilities. He limps. His head shakes. He drools when excited, his speech is unclear. Augustus and Tiberius considered him an embarrassment to the family, unsuitable for public office. But the Praetorians need an emperor. Their status, their pay, their entire position depends on there being an emperor to guard. Claudius is a member of the imperial family, which gives him legitimacy. And crucially, he's not someone the Senate chose. He's someone the soldiers are imposing on the Senate. They proclaim Claudius emperor and march him to their camp. When the Senate hears what happened, they're furious, but also powerless. The Praetorian Guard has 9,000 soldiers. The Senate has words. Claudius promises the Praetorians a substantial donative, a cash payment for their loyalty. The practice will become standard. New emperors pay the guards to ensure their support. The Senate, faced with the reality that they either accept Claudius or face the wrath of the Praetorian Guard, grants him all imperial powers. The brief fantasy of restored republican government dies. Power flows from military force, not from constitutional legitimacy. Claudius, the scholarly limping embarrassment, turns out to be a surprisingly competent emperor. He has spent decades studying administration, governance, history. He understands how the empire actually functions. He adds new provinces: Britain, Mauritania, Thrace, Lycia. The conquest of Britain is particularly significant. Caesar had raided the island twice, but never conquered it. Claudius launches a full-scale invasion in 43 CE, establishes Roman rule, and uses the victory to bolster his legitimacy as a military emperor. He expands citizenship, allowing provincials to enter the Senate. He builds new aqueducts and the port at Ostia, improving Rome's water supply and food security. He professionalized the imperial bureaucracy, relying on freedmen, former slaves who owed everything to him, rather than aristocrats who might plot against him. But Claudius can't control his own household. His third wife, Messalina, becomes notorious for sexual excess, allegedly competing with a prostitute to see who could service more men in one night, supposedly going through 25 partners. True or not, Messalina definitely plots to overthrow Claudius and place her lover on the throne. When Claudius discovers the conspiracy, he has her executed. His fourth wife is his niece, Agrippina the Younger. Marrying your niece was technically incest under Roman law, but Claudius has the Senate pass legislation making it legal for this specific case. Agrippina is ambitious, intelligent, and ruthless. She has a son from a previous marriage, Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, whom Claudius adopts and renames Nero Claudius Caesar. Agrippina positions Nero as heir ahead of Claudius's biological son Britannicus. In 54 CE, Claudius dies suddenly after eating mushrooms. Everyone assumes poison. Everyone suspects Agrippina. Nero becomes emperor at 16, guided by his mother, his tutor Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, and the Praetorian prefect Burrus. The first 5 years of Nero's reign would later be remembered as a model of good government. But that wouldn't last. For 5 years, Nero governs well, or rather Seneca and Burrus govern well. While Nero enjoys being emperor, he's young, handsome, interested in art and music and poetry. He wants to be seen as a cultured, sophisticated ruler, not a boring administrator like Claudius or a paranoid recluse like Tiberius. But his mother, Agrippina, makes a fundamental mistake. She thinks she can control him indefinitely. She expects Nero to remain grateful, obedient, malleable. Instead, as Nero grows older and more confident, he chafes under her influence. In 59 CE, he decides to kill her. The first attempt is elaborate, a collapsible boat designed to sink while Agrippina is at sea. It fails, she swims to shore. The second attempt is direct. Soldiers break into her villa and stab her to death. According to legend, as the soldier raises his sword, Agrippina points to her womb and says, "Strike here," indicating where she carried Nero. After murdering his mother, Nero deteriorates rapidly. Burrus dies in 62 CE, possibly of natural causes, possibly poisoned. Seneca retires, reading the political winds correctly. Nero divorces his wife Octavia, Claudius's daughter, and marries his mistress Poppaea. When public criticism doesn't stop, he has Octavia executed. When Poppaea criticizes him, he kicks her to death while she's pregnant. In July 64 CE, a massive fire breaks out in Rome. It burns for 6 days, destroying 3 of Rome's 14 districts completely and damaging 7 others. Thousands die. Hundreds of thousands are left homeless. The rumor immediately spreads that Nero started the fire deliberately to clear land for a massive new palace complex he wanted to build. The rumor probably isn't true. Nero was at Antium, 35 miles away, when the fire started. He rushes back to Rome, opens public buildings to shelter refugees, organizes relief efforts, controls grain prices to prevent gouging. But the story persists that Nero played his lyre and sang about the fall of Troy while Rome burned. Whether or not he started the fire, Nero does use the cleared land to build his Domus Aurea, the Golden House, a sprawling palace complex with gardens, lakes, a colossal statue of himself 100 feet tall. It's not just a palace. It's a statement that the emperor owns Rome itself. To deflect blame for the fire, Nero needs scapegoats. He chooses the Christians, a small secretive sect viewed with suspicion by most Romans. He accuses them of arson and unleashes persecution. Christians are burned alive as human torches to light Nero's gardens at night. They're sewn into animal skins and torn apart by dogs. Among those executed are, according to Christian tradition, the apostles Peter and Paul. By 65 CE, Nero's behavior has become intolerable, even by the standards of a regime built on one-man rule. Third conspiracy forms: senators, equestrians, even some praetorians. The Pisonian conspiracy, named after its nominal leader Gaius Calpurnius Piso, plans to assassinate Nero during games in the circus and proclaim Piso emperor. But someone betrays the plot. Nero unleashes another purge. Seneca is forced to suicide, even though he probably wasn't involved. The poet Lucan, who was involved, is also forced to suicide. Dozens of others die, but Nero's position is eroding. He has alienated the Senate through murder and confiscation. He has scandalized traditional Romans by performing publicly as an actor and musician. Respectable Romans didn't perform on stage. That was work for slaves and freedmen. He has emptied the treasury funding his artistic pursuits and massive building projects. In 68 CE, Gaius Julius Vindex, governor of Gaul, rebels. His forces are quickly defeated, but the rebellion spreads. Servius Sulpicius Galba, governor of Spain, declares himself emperor with the support of his legions. The Praetorian Guard, unpaid and disgruntled, abandons Nero. The Senate declares him a public enemy. Nero flees Rome with a few faithful servants. On June 9, 68 CE, hearing that soldiers are coming to arrest him, he commits suicide. His last words, according to Suetonius, are "Qualis artifex perio." What an artist dies in me. With Nero's death, the Julio-Claudian dynasty, the family of Augustus and Tiberius, stretching back through adoption and blood to Julius Caesar himself, is extinct. For the first time since Augustus, there is no obvious heir, no designated successor. The system faces its greatest test yet. It almost breaks. Galba enters Rome in October 68 CE. He's 73 years old, a stern disciplinarian from an old noble family, a competent general but politically tone-deaf. His first act is to refuse to pay the Praetorian Guard the donative they expect. He believes soldiers should serve from duty, not for bribes. The guards immediately begin plotting his overthrow. Meanwhile, the legions along the Rhine refused to swear loyalty to Galba. They had supported Vindex's rebellion, but Galba had him killed. Now they want their own emperor. On January 1st, 69 CE, they refuse the annual oath of loyalty. On January 2nd, they proclaim their commander, Aulus Vitellius, as emperor. In Rome, Marcus Salvius Otho, a former friend of Nero who expected Galba to adopt him as heir, realizes he's been passed over. On January 15, 69 CE, Praetorian guards assassinate Galba in the Roman Forum, killing him and his designated heir, Piso. Otho is proclaimed emperor by the remaining Praetorians, but Vitellius's legions are already marching south from the Rhine. Otho raises an army and meets them in northern Italy. At the First Battle of Bedriacum in April 69 CE, Otho's forces are defeated. Rather than prolong the civil war, Otho commits suicide. He had been emperor for 3 months. Vitellius enters Rome and is recognized as emperor by the Senate. He's a glutton and a drunk. Sources claim he ate 4 banquets a day. But he's also backed by the powerful Rhine legions, the most battle-hardened troops in the empire. But the Eastern legions, those stationed in Syria and Judea, refuse to accept Vitellius. On July 1st, 69 CE, they proclaimed their commander Titus Flavius Vespasianus, Vespasian, as emperor. Vespasian is 59 years old, from a middle-class family, a career military officer without the aristocratic pedigree of previous emperors. His supporters make that a virtue. Rome needs practical competence, not noble bloodlines. Vespasian remains in the east, securing Egypt and its grain supply. He sends his generals to Italy. They defeat Vitellius's forces at the Second Battle of Bedriacum in October 69 CE. Vitellius tries to abdicate, but his soldiers won't let him. In December, Vespasian's troops storm Rome. Vitellius is captured, dragged through the streets, tortured, and killed. His body is thrown in the Tiber. 4 emperors in 1 year. Civil war. Legions from different frontiers marching on Rome and fighting each other. The empire nearly fragmenting along regional lines. This is what happens when the succession system fails. When there's no clear mechanism for choosing the next emperor, except military force. Vespasian understands he must stabilize the system, or it will tear itself apart. Vespasian is something new, an emperor without any connection to the Julio-Claudian family, without aristocratic lineage, without the mystique of being Caesar's heir. He's a soldier from a family that produces good soldiers and capable administrators. His father was a tax collector. His grandfather was a centurion. These aren't shameful origins, but they're not imperial ones either. Previous emperors could trace their lineage to ancient patrician families, to the heroes of the Republic. Vespasian's ancestry is solidly middle class. He makes this a strength rather than a weakness. Where Nero built a golden palace and pretended to be Apollo incarnate, Vespasian lives modestly and makes jokes about his humble origins. When flatterers try to invent a noble genealogy for him, connecting him to ancient heroes, he laughs at them. When he's dying, he'll quip, "Oh dear, I think I'm becoming a god," mocking the practice of deifying emperors. But Vespasian is not modest about fixing Rome's problems. The civil war has devastated the treasury. Nero's extravagances emptied it. The year of 4 emperors drained what remained. Vespasian needs money, and he's shameless about finding it. He invents new taxes, restores old ones that had been allowed to lapse, improves tax collection efficiency. When his son Titus complains about a tax on public urinals, Vespasian holds up a coin and asks, "Does it smell?" Money is money, regardless of its source. He restores military discipline. The legions that fought each other in the civil war are reformed, some disbanded entirely. Their soldiers retired or reassigned. Vespasian makes clear that soldiers serve Rome, not individual generals. Legionary loyalty must be to the emperor, not to frontier commanders who might use troops to bid for power. He rebuilds Rome physically. The civil war damaged the city. Nero's fire had already destroyed large sections. Vespasian begins massive construction projects, partly to employ Rome's urban poor, partly to restore the city's grandeur. His greatest project is the Flavian Amphitheater, built on the site where Nero's golden house had stood. We know it as the Colosseum. It's a deliberate symbolic statement. Where Nero built a private palace, the Flavian dynasty builds a public arena. The emperor serves the people's entertainment, not his own ego. Vespasian rules for 10 years. He dies of natural causes in 79 CE, the first emperor since Augustus to die peacefully in bed and successfully pass power to his biological son. Before he dies, he insists on standing up. An emperor should die on his feet, he says. Then he collapses and dies. His son Titus succeeds him smoothly, without opposition, without civil war. The system works. Titus has been preparing for power his entire adult life. He commanded legions in Judea, captured Jerusalem in 70 CE after a brutal siege, brought the treasures of the temple back to Rome. He served as praetorian prefect under his father, making him both heir and enforcer. Some Romans feared he would be another Nero, young, powerful, accustomed to having his way. Instead, Titus becomes one of Rome's most beloved emperors, though he rules for barely 2 years. In August 79 CE, Mount Vesuvius erupts. The volcano had been dormant for centuries. Romans built cities at its base, Pompeii, Herculaneum, Stabiae, wealthy resort towns where rich Romans owned vacation villas. When Vesuvius explodes, it buries these cities under volcanic ash and pumice. Thousands die, either from the initial eruption, from toxic gases, or from the pyroclastic flows that incinerate everything in their path. Titus responds with immediate, organized relief. He sends senators to coordinate rescue efforts. He provides imperial funds for reconstruction. He visits the disaster area personally. This isn't just competent administration. It's the emperor visibly caring for his people's suffering. Something Romans notice and remember. The next year, 80 CE, fire breaks out in Rome again, burning for 3 days. Then plague strikes. Titus once again provides relief, opens his own properties to shelter refugees, uses imperial resources to help the suffering. He dedicates the Colosseum with games lasting 100 days, partly celebration, partly distraction from disaster, partly demonstrating that Rome endures. In September 81 CE, Titus falls ill. He dies within days, possibly from the same plague afflicting Rome. He's 41 years old. He ruled for 2 years, 2 months, and 20 days. The Senate mourns him genuinely. The people weep. Suetonius, writing later, calls him the darling of the human race. His younger brother Domitian succeeds him. The transition is smooth, but Domitian is not Titus. Domitian is the second son, the one who didn't command armies, didn't share in the glory of conquering Jerusalem, lived in his father's and brother's shadow. Now he's emperor, and he intends to prove himself. In terms of administration, he succeeds. Domitian is competent, perhaps the most administratively capable emperor since Augustus. He manages the empire's finances carefully, maintaining the treasury Vespasian rebuilt. He strengthens the frontiers, particularly along the Rhine and Danube, building fortifications and improving military infrastructure. He reforms the coinage, increasing its silver content to restore confidence in Roman money. He enforces moral legislation, punishing adultery and attempting to restore traditional Roman values. But Domitian lacks his father's common touch and his brother's warmth. He's autocratic, paranoid, and increasingly insistent on the trappings of divine monarchy that previous Flavian emperors had downplayed. He demands to be addressed as Dominus et Deus, Lord and God, during his lifetime. He holds elaborate court ceremonies that feel more like Eastern despotism than Roman tradition. The Senate hates him. Domitian doesn't pretend to be first among equals. He makes clear that the Senate exists at his pleasure, that its deliberations are theater. This is true. It's been true since Augustus, but saying it explicitly destroys the comfortable fiction that allows senators to maintain their dignity. Like Tiberius and Nero before him, Domitian becomes convinced of conspiracies. Treason trials increase. Senators are executed, their property confiscated. Philosophers are expelled from Rome. Domitian sees Stoicism as breeding dissent, teaching men to question authority. The poet Juvenal later writes that under Domitian, the Senate was slaughtered in servile submission. In 96 CE, Domitian is assassinated. The conspiracy includes members of his own household. His wife may have been involved, along with praetorian prefects and palace officials. They stab him in his bedroom. The Senate immediately declares damnatio memoriae, condemnation of memory. Domitian's name is chiseled off monuments. His images are destroyed. The Senate wants him erased from history, but Domitian's death poses the same problem as Nero's. No heir, no designated successor, no clear mechanism for choosing the next emperor. The Flavian dynasty is extinct. The empire once again teeters on the edge of civil war. The solution that emerges will transform how Rome selects emperors and usher in the empire's golden age. The Senate, in consultation with the Praetorian Guard and other power brokers, chooses Marcus Cocceius Nerva as emperor. Nerva is 66 years old, a respected senator who has served under multiple emperors, a safe choice precisely because he's old, childless, and unlikely to establish a dynasty. He's a transitional figure, meant to stabilize the succession crisis without threatening anyone. But Nerva is weak. The Praetorian Guard, angry that Domitian's assassins haven't been punished, demand justice. They besiege the imperial palace and force Nerva to hand over those responsible for the conspiracy. The Emperor of Rome, humiliated by his own soldiers, has to execute the very people who made him emperor. Nerva understands he needs military backing to survive. So in October 97 CE, he does something that will change Roman history. He adopts Marcus Ulpius Traianus, Trajan, as his son and heir. Trajan is a successful general commanding legions on the Rhine frontier. He has no blood relation to Nerva. This is adoption purely for political succession, choosing the most capable man rather than the closest relative. When Nerva dies in January 98 CE, Trajan succeeds smoothly. The legions support him because he's one of them. The Senate accepts him because the alternative is civil war. The people don't care. They just want stability. And for the next 84 years, this becomes the pattern. Each emperor, when he feels death approaching, adopts the most capable man available and designates him as heir. No civil wars, no military coups, the most peaceful, prosperous period in Roman history. Historians later call them the five good emperors: Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. But good might be the wrong word. Effective is more accurate. These are men who understand how to wield absolute power without destroying the system that grants it. Trajan is the first emperor born outside Italy. He comes from Hispania, from a family of Roman colonists who had settled in Spain generations earlier. This would have been unthinkable 50 years earlier. Now it barely matters. Roman identity is expanding beyond the city itself to encompass the entire empire. Trajan is a military emperor, but he's not a warmonger. He understands that Rome's strength lies not just in conquest, but in consolidation, administration, and infrastructure. He launches two major military campaigns, both strategic rather than glory-seeking. The Dacian Wars, 101-102 CE and 105-106 CE, bring the territory north of the Danube under Roman control. Dacia is wealthy: gold mines, silver mines, agricultural land. More importantly, Dacian tribes have been raiding across the Danube for decades. Trajan's conquest eliminates the threat and adds a buffer zone protecting the empire's heartland. The gold from Dacia finances massive building projects throughout the empire. Trajan's Column, erected in Rome to celebrate the victory, stands 130 feet tall, its spiral relief depicting scenes from the Dacian campaigns. It's propaganda, certainly, but also remarkable art and a detailed historical record. When you look at the column today, you can see Roman soldiers building bridges, besieging fortresses, treating wounded, not just fighting, but engineering and administering, because that's how Rome actually conquered. The Parthian campaign, 113-117 CE, is more controversial. Parthia, centered in modern Iran and Iraq, is Rome's only peer competitor. The two empires have been rivals for over a century, fighting over Armenia and the eastern frontier. Trajan invades, captures Ctesiphon, the Parthian capital, and reaches the Persian Gulf, the furthest east Rome will ever extend. He creates new provinces: Armenia, Mesopotamia, Assyria. But the conquests are fragile. Jewish populations in Cyprus, Egypt, and Cyrenaica rebel, requiring brutal suppression. Parthian resistance continues. Trajan falls ill while campaigning. In August 117 CE, he dies in Cilicia, officially from a stroke, though some sources suggest poison. What matters most about Trajan isn't his conquests, but his domestic policy. He understands that an empire requires infrastructure. He builds roads, aqueducts, bridges, harbors throughout the provinces. He establishes the alimenta program, using income from imperial estates to support poor children in Italian towns, part welfare program, part investment in future taxpayers and soldiers. He builds Trajan's Forum in Rome, the largest and most elaborate of the imperial forums, including libraries, markets, and administrative buildings. More subtly, Trajan establishes what good emperors should be. He corresponds with Pliny the Younger, governor of Bithynia, about administrative matters. These letters survive, giving us a window into how the empire actually functioned. When Pliny asks how to handle Christians, a growing sect that refuses to sacrifice to the emperor, Trajan responds with moderation. Don't hunt them actively. Don't accept anonymous accusations. But if they're properly accused and refuse to sacrifice, punish them. It's pragmatic rather than persecutory. The response of an administrator managing a diverse empire, not an ideologue enforcing religious orthodoxy. The Senate names him Optimus Princeps, best ruler. Later Roman emperors, when taking power, will be wished Felicior Augusto, Melia Traiano, luckier than Augustus, better than Trajan. That becomes the standard of excellence. Before his death, Trajan adopts his cousin Publius Aelius Hadrianus, Hadrian as his heir. The adoption is announced after Trajan dies, leading some to suspect that Trajan's wife Plotina forged the adoption, but it doesn't matter. The legions support Hadrian. The succession holds. Hadrian is everything Trajan was not. Where Trajan was a soldier's soldier, Hadrian is an intellectual and aesthete. Where Trajan expanded the empire, Hadrian consolidates and in some cases contracts it. Where Trajan barely left Italy except for campaigns, Hadrian spends most of his reign traveling the provinces, visiting every corner of the empire, inspecting defenses, meeting local officials, understanding how the system actually works at ground level. Hadrian's first major decision is controversial. He abandons Trajan's eastern conquests. The new provinces in Mesopotamia and Assyria are impossible to hold without constant warfare. Hadrian withdraws to defensible frontiers along the Euphrates, giving up territory Trajan died to conquer. The Senate grumbles. The army grumbles. Hadrian doesn't care. He understands that empire is about sustainable borders, not maximum extent. His most famous project is the wall in Britain. Hadrian's Wall, 73 miles across the narrow neck of the island, marks the empire's northern limit. It's not primarily a military barrier. A determined army could bypass or breach it. It's a statement, this is where Rome ends. Beyond this point is barbarian land, not worth the cost of conquest. But Hadrian's real innovation is administrative. He standardizes laws across provinces, codifies the Praetorian Edict, the legal principles praetors use to decide cases, and improves imperial bureaucracy. The empire had been growing more complex for a century. Now it needs systematic administration to function efficiently. Hadrian provides it. He's also deeply, almost embarrassingly, Hellenophile. He loves Greek culture, philosophy, art, literature, architecture. He grows a beard, the first emperor to do so since Augustus, adopting the Greek philosophical fashion rather than the Roman clean-shaven look. He rebuilds the Pantheon in Rome with its magnificent dome, still standing today, a masterpiece of Roman engineering expressing Greek aesthetic ideals. When he visits Athens, he's welcomed as a patron and benefactor, completing temples and building new structures. His personal life becomes notorious after he meets Antinous, a Greek youth from Bithynia. Antinous becomes Hadrian's beloved companion. When Antinous drowns in the Nile in 130 CE, accident, suicide, or ritual sacrifice, no one knows. Hadrian's grief is profound and public. He founds a city, Antinopolis, at the spot where Antinous died. He commissions hundreds of statues of the youth throughout the empire. He may have had Antinous deified, creating a cult that spreads across the eastern provinces. Roman traditionalists are horrified. Greek-style pederasty had always made Romans uncomfortable. Having the emperor openly mourn a male lover with such extravagance violated Roman notions of imperial dignity. But Hadrian doesn't care about Roman sensibilities. He governs effectively, maintains peace, strengthens the frontiers, and conducts his personal life as he chooses. In his final years, Hadrian's health fails. He suffers from edema, possibly heart disease. He becomes increasingly difficult, executing senators he suspects of disloyalty. He tries to commit suicide multiple times, but is prevented by his attendants. Finally, in July 138 CE, he dies at his villa in Baiae. He's 62 years old. Before his death, Hadrian arranged a complex succession. His first choice died before him. So Hadrian adopted Antoninus, a senator known for competence and steadiness, on the condition that Antoninus in turn adopt two heirs, Marcus Annius Verus, later Marcus Aurelius, and Lucius Saeonius Commodus, later Lucius Verus. Hadrian is planning 2 generations ahead, trying to ensure stability for decades. It works. Antoninus rules for 23 years, and almost nothing happens. That's what makes his reign remarkable. No civil wars, no major military campaigns, no political purges, no conspiracies, no assassinations, no dramatic building projects or personality cults. Antoninus governs competently, maintains the frontiers, manages the treasury carefully, responds to provincial needs, and dies quietly in bed at age 74. This is what a successful empire looks like when it's not facing existential crises or led by monsters or warmongers. It looks boring, and boring is exactly what Rome needs after centuries of drama. Antoninus gets his cognomen Pius from his insistence that the Senate deify Hadrian despite their reluctance. The Senate had disliked Hadrian for his executions of senators in his final years. Antoninus persists, arguing that Hadrian's administrative achievements and frontier security merit deification. The Senate yields. This display of filial piety, respecting his adoptive father, earns Antoninus the title pious, which means dutiful or respectful. His reign demonstrates that the adoptive system works. Antoninus wasn't chosen because he was someone's son, or because he commanded the most legions. He was chosen because he was capable, steady, and trustworthy, and he proves the choice correct. When Antoninus dies in March 161 CE, power passes smoothly to Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus, the two men Antoninus had adopted at Hadrian's instruction. For the first time, Rome has two co-emperors, sharing power equally in theory, though Marcus Aurelius clearly has seniority. This moment, 161 CE, represents the absolute peak of Roman power, prosperity, and stability. The empire stretches from Scotland to Sudan, from Portugal to Persia. 60 million people live under Roman rule, protected by disciplined legions, governed by standardized law, connected by 50,000 miles of paved roads. Cities throughout the provinces boast forums, aqueducts, amphitheaters, baths. Trade goods flow from India and China to Britain and Germany. The Mediterranean truly is Mare Nostrum, our sea. If there's a golden age of Rome, this is it. But golden ages don't last. They can't, because the system still has a fundamental flaw that no amount of competent administration can fix. The emperor is mortal, and eventually every succession creates the possibility of catastrophe. Marcus Aurelius will expose that flaw. Marcus Aurelius is the emperor who did everything right and still failed. That makes him perhaps the most tragic figure in Roman history. He's a Stoic philosopher, a genuine intellectual who writes meditations, personal notes on how to be virtuous, how to endure suffering, how to fulfill duty without being corrupted by power. He didn't write it for publication. These are private reflections, advice he gives himself about being a good man in an impossible situation. That we can read them today is a kind of miracle. He's also one of the hardest-working emperors Rome ever has. From the moment he takes power, he faces crisis after crisis. The Parthian War, 161–166 CE, requires sending Lucius Verus east with legions to secure Armenia. The war is successful. Rome defeats Parthia, maintains control of Armenia, sacks Ctesiphon. But the returning soldiers bring something worse than any military defeat. Plague, the Antonine plague, likely smallpox, spreads throughout the empire beginning in 165 CE. It kills millions over the next 15 years. Some estimates suggest 25% of the population dies. Trade disrupts. Army recruitment suffers. The tax base shrinks. The economy, which had been growing steadily for 2 centuries, contracts. Then Germanic tribes, the Marcomanni, Quadi, and others, cross the Danube frontier in unprecedented numbers. They're not raiding, they're migrating, pushed by pressure from tribes further east. In 167 CE, Germanic tribes reach northern Italy, threatening Rome itself for the first time since the Cimbri and Teutones, 2.5 centuries earlier. Marcus Aurelius spends the last 14 years of his reign fighting along the Danube frontier. He wins, eventually. The tribes are pushed back. The frontier is restored, but it requires constant warfare, constant vigilance, and enormous resources. And he does all this while sick. Marcus Aurelius suffers from chronic illness, probably stomach ulcers, possibly from the stress of endless crisis management. He medicates himself with opium mixed with wine, theriac, a common Roman painkiller. He's not an addict in the modern sense, but he's dependent on it to function. His meditations, written in his tent on the Danube while barbarians pressed the frontier, is perhaps the most profound statement ever made by a person in absolute power. He reminds himself constantly not to be corrupted, not to abuse his position, to remember that emperors die like everyone else, to focus on duty rather than glory. So you have power over your mind, not outside events, he writes. Realize this, and you will find strength. But Marcus Aurelius makes one catastrophic mistake, the mistake that will undo everything the 5 good emperors built. He has a biological son, and unlike his 4 predecessors, who adopted capable adults as heirs, Marcus Aurelius designates his son Commodus to succeed him. Maybe he can't help it. The adoptive principle worked precisely because those emperors had no sons. Now that an emperor has a biological heir, the pressure to make him successor is overwhelming. Romans still think dynastically. Marcus Aurelius had been grooming Commodus for power since childhood, making him co-emperor at age 15. But Commodus is the wrong man for the job. Everyone can see it. He's not interested in administration or philosophy or duty. He wants gladiatorial games and personal glory. He's vain, violent, and unstable. He's everything Nero was without Nero's artistic pretensions. Marcus Aurelius knows this. He must know. But he makes him heir anyway, perhaps hoping Commodus will mature, perhaps unable to break with dynastic expectation, perhaps simply too exhausted from years of war and plague to imagine another solution. In March 180 CE, Marcus Aurelius dies in his military camp at Vindobona, modern Vienna. He's 58 years old. He's been emperor for 19 years, and almost all of them involved warfare, plague, or both. His last words, according to sources, are about duty and succession, urging his advisors to care for his son. Commodus becomes emperor. The Marcomannic Wars end immediately. Commodus signs a quick peace treaty and returns to Rome to enjoy being emperor without all the tedious governing and frontier. Defense his father did. The 5 good emperors have ended. The system's fatal flaw is exposed. Adoption works only when emperors have no biological sons. When they do, dynastic succession overrides capability. The Golden Age is over. So what did it actually mean to live at the height of the Roman Empire? If you were a citizen in a provincial city, Ephesus, Antioch, Lugdunum, Alexandria, your life was probably better than it would be for the next 1,000 years. Your city had paved streets, public baths where you could socialize and exercise, aqueducts bringing clean water, sewers removing waste. You could walk to the forum to do business, attend the theater for entertainment, visit temples for religious observance. If you had even modest wealth, you could own slaves who did the household labor. You could read books copied by professional scribes. You could buy goods from across the empire: Spanish olive oil, Egyptian wheat, Syrian purple dye, British tin, Indian spices, Chinese silk. The denarius in your purse had consistent value from Scotland to Sudan. If you were a merchant, you could travel safely on roads patrolled by soldiers, protected from bandits. You could ship goods across the Mediterranean without worrying about pirates. The sea had been cleared by Pompey 2 centuries earlier and remained secure. You paid taxes, certainly, but those taxes bought security. If you had a legal dispute, you could appeal to Roman law standardized across the empire. Provincial governors held court regularly. Justice wasn't perfect. Corruption existed. The wealthy had advantages, but it was systematic, predictable and accessible. If you were a soldier, you served 25 years in a legion, stationed on one of the frontiers. The pay was steady. The food was adequate. The discipline was harsh but fair. When you retired, you received either a plot of land or a cash payment that let you live comfortably. You were a Roman citizen, a member of the most successful military organization in human history. The empire wasn't paradise. It was built on slavery. Perhaps 1/3 of the population was enslaved. Social mobility existed but was limited. Women had fewer rights than men. Provincial populations paid heavy taxes to support Rome's urban poor and military machine. Plague, fire, and famine still occurred, but by the standards of the ancient world it was remarkably successful. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, was real. For 2 centuries, the Mediterranean world experienced unprecedented stability, prosperity, and integration. That's what Marcus Aurelius inherited. That's what he tried desperately to preserve through plague, war, and endless crisis. And that's what his son would begin to destroy. Not through malice, but through incompetence and self-indulgence. The empire wouldn't fall immediately. It would take another 3 centuries, but the long, slow unraveling begins in 180 CE, when a philosopher-emperor who did everything right passes power to a son who would do almost everything wrong. Rome at its height was a system that worked when competent men ran it. The tragedy is that no system depending on one person's competence can last forever. Eventually you get a Commodus, and when you do, 2 centuries of careful construction begin to crumble. But that's a story for another time.